New commit for 2026. The ACC odds for next season are here, and there's an uncertain future facing the CFP. What does that mean for Florida State? We're going to talk about all that in today's episode. We actually have a lot of football talk to go over, and of course, we're going to tack on a quick preview of the baseball series against Penn starting this weekend. So, what's up, Noel Nation? I'm Jesse from Plant the Spear, and thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with some recruiting updates. Last night on Thursday night, Florida State added a new linebacker out of South Florida to their 2026 class in 6'1", 200-pound Kayron Maycock. I hope I'm saying that right. I actually heard he was closer to around 6'2", 215, but that's what's on his official 247 profile. So we're going to roll with that. Three-star linebacker. He is a four-star according to Rivals. He is also listed as a safety according to On3. It depends on where you look. He's coming out of Miami Central High School there in South Florida. Actually plays a little bit of both positions. Just kind of shows his versatility there. Number 571 recruit nationally. Number 43 linebacker, according to 247, and number 86 player in the state of Florida. Now, I know the three-star is going to, some people might roll their eyes at that a little bit, but I think this is a pretty good pickup for Florida State. And the reason I say that is one, what you're getting, which we're going to talk about in a second, but I always tend to follow the offers, the other offers. And you beat out in-state rival Miami, which is obviously big for Florida State to go and get a recruiting win on the trail against a program that's kind of hot right now, especially when you consider that he is right there in their backyard. Actually, he had a crystal ball prediction to land with Miami, and Florida State plucks him out of their grip there. He also had offers from Florida, Alabama, and Penn State, among other Power Four programs. And really what I like about him when I turn on his huddle film, he is a versatile player that FSU likes at the nickel position. Like we talked about, he plays linebacker and he plays safety, but Florida State, according to his interviews, said that they want to bring him in at nickel. He is viewed more at the linebacker position there. And what I like here again is the versatility. You got a guy who can play inside if you need him to. Might be a little bit light to be playing inside, so you might want to have him gain some mass there. But I think you're looking at more an outside linebacker position here. But you can bring him off the edge. He does that frequently there at Miami Central. Is a very effective blitzer at creating havoc in the backfield. And he's also a guy that can cover in space with experience at the safety position. Very rangy, athletic player. He plays a physical downhill game, not scared to get his nose dirty and get in there and make some big hits. When I watched this film, what really stood out to me the most were his instincts. I mean, you can see he's really good at reading defenses, blowing up plays. And I mean, his stats speak for themselves. 62 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries, and 3 PBUs in only 8 games last year as a junior. So excited to see where his senior season takes him, as he is an up-and-comer. I expect him probably to earn that 4th star over the course of the season if he has a good year as a senior there. And like I said, he gives you versatility in a versatile defense under new DC Tony White. We've talked, we've heard him as well as some of the other transfers like James White, who came in, James Williams, should I say, came in and talked about how people get locked in on that 3-3-5 defense, but depending on what he has from a talent perspective, Tony White is a very multiple defensive guy. And so I think this is someone who can fit into the scheme that he brings. And so I think it's a good pickup. Again, not only did you get him, you steal him from Miami. So that's good too. Now, the thing is, he does have a official visit listed over the summer for Miami. He also has one coming up in late June for Florida State as well. So I don't know if he's going to take that Miami visit yet or not. That has not really been clarified. Hopefully he just cancels it. But I think with this one, you're probably going to have to try and hang on, right? I mean, he's a talented player, up and coming. You're going to probably want to win on the field, have some success there. So you're going to have to fight for him. But I think at the time, you're looking pretty good here in Florida State's class in 2026. I know it's extremely early to be talking about recruiting rankings, but Florida State with this commitment does move up to the number 11 spot and number 1 in the ACC for that 2026 class. Now, again, like we said, a long way to go here, but hopefully with what you're seeing so far, if Florida State can have success on the field coming up this season, that this might be the opportunity with this new staff to finally land that first top 10 class in Mike Norvell's tenure at Florida State. Now, they've gotten close with the number 12 class before, but this is something that we wanted to see. We wanted to see recruiting progress. So, a good addition for the 26th class. And again, we'll see how things play out over the season. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about here is the potential expansion of the playoffs, some ACC odds, and how all that fits in for Florida State. But before we do that, let me bring you a quick word from today's sponsor, and that is our friends over at Alumni Hall FSU. Look, these guys have elite gear no matter what season it is, whether it's baseball, basketball, or football. They got the gear you want at a great price when you use code SPEAR to save 10%. So check them out. If you're in Tallahassee, maybe you're headed to Hauser for that baseball series, 1415 Timber Lane Road, or shop online at alumnihall.com. They have rewards, they have an app, they have everything for the ultimate Seminole shopping experience. So check those guys out, and we appreciate you supporting those that support us. Now, let's talk about this expanded playoff talk here. This recently came out from a report by Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports. And, this is kind of something that we've expected for a while for the playoffs to change. There's been a lot of talk about them expanding to 14 teams, possibly 16 teams. We hinted at this in another episode, talking about realignment, that the Power Two, I guess you want to call them, conferences. I mean, I know it's still the Power Four, but it feels more like Power Two and then the other two. Those Power Two conferences are kind of throwing their weight around right now. And really, they're threatening to break off if they don't get their way, because right now, I think the problem is, since expansion, they have a majority of the big brands. So what are you supposed to do if you're the ACC and the Big 12? What is your leverage? Well, the answer is you have none. So you really kind of have to play by their rules. You have to do what they want. And now, I don't think it's good for the sport either. I think you're kind of monopolizing the sport with these two conferences kind of getting their way and doing what they want. It's not the college football that we know. And we've talked about that in the past, about how it's kind of disappointing the way it's headed. At this point, why not just go to super conferences and get it over with? But let's get into some of the details here. It looks like what they're asking for is 4 automatic qualifier spots for the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, in 2024, in case you were curious, the SEC did get in 3 of the top 4 teams there in the conference. They made that. The number 4 SEC team was a 10-3 team in Missouri last year. So it's not necessarily like you're getting an 8-win team coming in there in the 4 spots that they might get. And I think it's worth mentioning that when you have 18 and 20 team conferences with most of the big brands in college football, you can understand what they're asking for this for. Like, I mean, you look at the Big Ten, the number 4 team last year, and the Big Ten had a really good year last year. But the number 4 team in the Big Ten last year was Ohio State, who went 14-2 and won the national championship. All 4 Big Ten teams in the top 4 made the playoffs last year. The number 4 team in the ACC was Syracuse at 10-3, and the number 4 team was Colorado from the Big 12 at 9-4. So you can understand maybe why they're asking for these things, but I just don't like it, because last year can be a lot different than other years. You may have where the ACC has a strong year. You may have where the Big 12 has a strong year. Look at the last year that the Pac-12 existed. They had probably their best year as a conference, maybe ever, where they had a lot of really solid teams that deserve to be in. So, it's really just kind of the big guys asking for more pieces of the pie. And again, I think the question is, where does this leave Florida State? Where does this leave the Clemsons of the world? Now, I think when you do note that they are looking at going to these 4 automatic qualifier spots, the playoffs, that does likely mean an expansion, right? Obviously, you can't give them 8 of 12 spots. That would be kind of crazy. So you're looking at expanding to 14 to 16 teams here. Most likely 14, probably 16 if they can get away with it. And the thing is, those 8 bids between the Big Ten and the SEC, that's not the only ones that are guaranteed out there. You still have Notre Dame that's reportedly they get that automatic qualifier spot if they are ranked anywhere inside the top 14, if it were a 14-team playoff, which, maybe is a little ridiculous. You just got to finish anywhere in the top 14. That seems kind of, depending on the way your scheduling goes. And we know Notre Dame gets that kind of historical bump that they got it made. I mean, again, why would you go to a conference? It seems like a lot of this, with the money that they made last year from the CFP and just the things that the way they get that kind of protection in this plan, it almost seems like, why would they join a conference? Now, some of the other questions surrounding this is, will the SEC go to 9 conference games? Will this be the death of the conference title game? I mean, if you already have 4 teams making it in, why would you want that extra wear and tear? Why would you want a lot of the things why would you want those teams to play that extra game when maybe they don't need to or don't have to? You could just crown a regular season champion. There's also been talk of scheduling alliances between the SEC and the Big Ten to get more crossover games between these two big conferences. Now, we know how that worked out in the past when the SEC was expanding, and then the ACC and the Big Ten were supposed to do this. That nothing ever came of that. So we'll see how this goes. But what's left for Florida State and the ACC and the Big 12? Because keep in mind, the G5 winner also gets that bid too, that AQ bid. Well, that's 8 bids for the two Power 2 conferences, one for Notre Dame and one for the G5. That leaves 4 spots for the ACC and the Big 12 to fight over. So it sounds pretty much like you're never going to get more than 2 teams in unless one of those 2 conferences has a really bad year. Maybe you get 3 and the other gets 1. Kind of just have to see how that plays out, similar to the Big 12 last year. But the question that I ask in this, and this is just me asking internally, because I still think when you look at this at the end of the day, right, this is another one of the reasons why Florida State has to get out of the ACC. And the same goes for Clemson. Obviously, the revenue gap is the elephant in the room. It is the biggest reason why you need to get out of that conference. But I do think that just the display of power here, I think, is really one of the telling reasons why you need to end up in one of those conferences, because, you know, like the old saying goes, you give them an inch, they take a mile. What's next for these 2 conferences? What is next for the SEC and the Big Ten that they will ask for, that they will ultimately get? And, when they eventually do break off, you want to be a part of that. You don't want to be kind of sitting around with the leftovers here. And so I think that for Florida State, I think the end game is still to find your way out of the ACC into one of those 2 bigger conferences. I think that's what you really still want to do. But in the meantime, the question that I asked the other day when me and Michael were talking about that, and Michael's still out sick, so hopefully he'll be back with us soon here. But I just wonder, with Florida State, is it easier to grab one of the 2 spots that the ACC would get versus getting one of the 4 spots in the Power 2? I mean, you're competing against 17 teams in the ACC, where the SEC has 18 and the Big Ten has 20, I believe, or something like that. It's a lot. They're getting big. But those 17 teams in the ACC, I mean, realistically, you only got about 4, maybe 5 contenders when you look at, Clemson, Miami, SMU, Louisville from every now and then. To me, it's almost an easier path to land one of those top 2 spots than it would be to land one of the top 4 spots when you're competing against a Michigan, Ohio State, an Oregon, a Penn State, or you're looking at Texas and Alabama and Georgia, and not that we're asking for an easy path. That's never been the option for Florida State. But it is interesting kind of in the way when you talk about how we survive for now, and we'll see how these lawsuits play out. We'll see if Florida State can get out early enough, maybe earlier than 2036 to get into one of those conferences. But again, I don't really like it, but I understand the notion from these conferences that have the majority of the best teams. I just still think it should be based on an individual team's performance. Like, why can't we just, for everything we don't love about the committee, let them rank the top 14 teams based on the individual performance of that year, no matter what conference you play in. You can factor in strength of schedule. You can factor in all of these things still, and then let teams go out and earn it based on what you did that year, not based on the conference that you play in. And, I also think one thing that would help with this would be if we had more conference crossover games. Let's not make a scheduling alliance. Let's just everybody agree that we need more games between all these conferences. Like, I love that opening weekend. You have Florida State, Alabama. You have LSU, Clemson playing. You have some of these teams, I think Georgia Tech and Colorado play. Like, you have some of these crossover games that kind of let you know where these conferences stand as a whole. So you can come back at the end of the year when you do these rankings and you can go, okay, well, the ACC performed well against the Big 10 or the SEC this year, or the SEC crushed everybody this year, or whatever the case may be. That way you can have a year to year opinion, but at this point, I don't know that the committee's even going to matter anymore, because you have so many automatic qualifier spots. They don't really have a reason to exist. And I'm not sad to see them go. I just don't really love the current system that they're talking about going to. I think this further pushes the haves from the have-nots, and it creates that separation at the top. Now, what I do find interesting about this as well is in the 2025 playoff meetings for this year upcoming, they are talking about making some changes as well. They're going to have meetings coming up here soon to discuss this, but both Power 2 commissioners, Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti from the Big Ten, are in favor of going to straight seedings based on CFP rankings, what we just talked about. Basically, letting the committee do their job and then putting those, which we know they have a terrible history of doing. We've talked about that in the past, but let them rank the teams and let us base it on that way. And a lot of that came because they were mad that Boise State and Arizona State got first round buys when maybe they shouldn't have. But knowing that they're in favor of that kind of makes the last part of that conversation a little bit more crazy to think about. So, times are changing, and I think this is inevitable. I think, again, we are working towards those super conference type of layouts here. I think it's just kind of sad that you don't really have anybody looking out for the greater good of college football and the sport that we love. I can't say that I honestly blame the two commissioners from those conferences for doing what's best for those conferences, for maybe partnering with your cohort as the one of the power twos to get what you want because you are the controlling powers in college football. I can't necessarily blame them for that, because the fact that there is nobody looking out for college football, really it's just an arms race, and you're doing everything that you can to better your conferences because that's what you're being paid for. So, it's a new round of changes potentially being weighed out there for 2026 and beyond. And, I guess we're just going to have to see how things look going forward, what they vote on. But again, I think this just comes back to changes are coming. And I think Florida State, still needs to continue that fight to try and get out of the ACC. But, like I said, in the meantime, I don't think it would be impossible or even a strange conversation to have to think that you could grab one of those top two ACC bids versus having a harder time grabbing one of those top four SEC bids. But again, I think we still want to get out of here and compete in those Power 2 conferences, because it's not so much about the now. It's more about the future and down the road and what's going to happen next. Once you give them this, what are they going to ask for next? And at the end of the day, you're still asking these other conferences, the G5, the little guy that you decided to let in to hopefully pull an upset every now and then, the ACC and the Big 12. You are still asking these guys, these teams, these programs to go into these playoffs and compete against the SEC and the Big 10 teams that are making $40 and $50 million more per year than you are. So the system is flawed to begin with. And it seems like it's going to get even more weighed to one side here of the haves versus the have-nots. So these are going to be changes that we're going to have to watch as these meetings progress. But man, this is something to keep your ear to the ground for, because this is going to have a big impact on Florida State and how many chances they have to get into the college football playoffs. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, hey, you got to win more than 2 games to get in the playoffs. I hear you. I'm with you there. So we're going to work on that first. Now, talking about that, let's go into the next segment here, which is the odds for 2025 to win the ACC. Vegas has put out some odds. The sportsbook FanDuel, one of the largest in the country, has put out some odds looking at who's the favorite, the odds-on favorite to win the ACC in 2025. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if you guys are big fans of roller coasters. I'm not a huge fan of them, but I like them. This might sound a little weird. My favorite part is the beginning of the climb, right? You're just a steady climb to the top. Everything is calm. Everyone is excited about what's ahead. You can see for miles. It's just a great time, right? But the anticipation of what's going to come next, once you get over the crest of that hill, that's the part you don't know about. And then you start the free fall. People are screaming. Somebody passed out. Kids are vomiting everywhere. It's just a bird comes by and hits you in the face. Maybe you get stuck upside down for a few hours, have to get rescued out of the ride. It's just uncontrolled chaos. And, well, that's pretty much what Florida State was like over the past 2 years. When we talk about finishing in the ACC, we literally went from the undefeated ACC conference champion to dead last in 2024. Literally the first team to ever finish 17th in the 17-team expanded ACC. Trust me, there was plenty of screaming and vomiting during last season too. Now, hopefully this year starts to climb back to the top, but let's talk about these odds that the experts in Vegas have put out. And again, I think the one thing worth mentioning here, we are not at the top, but we're not at the bottom either. And the odds makers, they put a lot of money and effort and time into getting these right. but obviously they don't always get them right. I think they had Florida State as the odds-on favorite to win last year, and we know how that worked out. So let's take a look here at the picture from FanDuel. Number one on the list is Clemson at plus 250, with Miami coming in second at plus 310. SMU looking at another good year projected in the ACC at plus 460. And then Louisville rounds out the top four there at plus 500. And that's where you start to see the gap in odds really take a big jump. This is kind of where you have your top four, and then you have the rest. And coming in at number five is Georgia Tech at plus 1300. Florida State follows them at number six at 1800. So, like we said, you're not at the top, but you're not near the bottom. You are right there, smack dab, almost in the middle of the odds to finish in the ACC next year. Now, we're hoping Florida State obviously surprises to the upside here. But when you continue on down the list, you have North Carolina behind you at number 7, Duke at number 8, Virginia Tech at number 9, Syracuse at number 10, Cal at number 11. NC State was a little bit surprising all the way down at 12. You know, that's a consistently decent program. I know they had a step down year last year, but to finish 12th seems a little bit low, which that actually makes me excited because we have to go to Carter Finley to play them next year. Of course, Pitt coming in at 13, UVA at 14, BC at 15, Wake at 16, and Stanford bringing up the rear at number 17. Now, what I do think is interesting when you start looking at these odds, this is why I talk about where I think Florida State may be able to surprise in the ACC this year. If you think back to last year, that schedule was not murderer's row, perhaps, but it was not easy by any means. Florida State played 5 of the top 7 teams in the ACC last year. When you look at this current list that's been released that we just talked about, Florida State played 4 of the top 5 teams from that list last year. Now, of course, they didn't beat any of them, but when you look at this year and the schedule at hand, Florida State plays number 1 and number 2 in Clemson and Miami. But after that, the next highest team, and again, these are preseason odds, so we don't know how this is going to shake out. But the next highest team after that is number 9 with Virginia Tech. You play 9, 12, 13, 14, 16, and 17. So your ACC schedule, instead of playing a majority of the teams in the top half of the conference, now you're playing number 1 and number 2. And then you're playing basically the bottom feeders of the ACC. And so to me, that sets you up to have a much better season in the conference play. And again, as much as we want to win Alabama, as much as we want to go beat Florida in the swamp, really, if you're talking about a CFP picture, what matters the most is what you can do in conference. Because again, look at Clemson last year, got their doors absolutely blown off by Georgia. 34-3 or 31-3, whatever it was in the beginning of that season. Lost to South Carolina to end the season, just like you could see maybe from Florida State with an Alabama loss and a Florida loss, but they still made the ACC championship and they won and they still got into the playoffs. So that's why I think as long as you can surprise in the ACC, you never know what can happen. Now, of course, if you beat Alabama and you beat Florida, then you give yourself a larger chance there at one of the at-large bids. But I think when you look at this, I think, again, Florida State needs to win all of the ACC games that you, quote unquote, should win. The games against that 9-16 ranked team, the teams on that list that you should beat. And then you really probably just need to upset Miami or Clemson. You probably don't even need to get both. You just need to do one or the other. Now, Clemson at Death Valley is going to be tough, but you get Miami inside Doak Campbell Stadium early in the season, maybe coming off some early season momentum there. So really, I just think you kind of need to get one or the other. So just interesting to see where they have Florida State right now. Obviously, these odds could change as we get to see things progress throughout the spring, kind of get a feel of how these teams are looking going into the next season. But I thought it was interesting to see that even coming from that 17th place finish last year, Florida State did finish 6th, or at least is ranked in the preseason at 6th in odds-on favorite to win the ACC. Now, again, you got a lot of work to go because plus 1,800 is not good odds by any means. But I think it just shows that people do understand that last year should never have happened. And why it happened, maybe we'll never know. I mean, we can point to the offensive line issues. We can point to the quarterback issues. We can point to a lot of things. But at the same time, that team that finished 2-10 was not a 2-10 team. We had seen the players on that team play a lot better in the past. So hopefully the overhaul coaching staff, bringing in more experienced transfers, which we've talked about in the past, can lead them to surprise to the upside, and Florida State can get back in the thick of things for the ACC. Now, some other interesting odds put out by FanDuel that I think you guys would like to know here. Florida State and Bama, that big week 1 matchup inside Doak Campbell Stadium. Bama is currently sitting at a 8.5-point favorite over Florida State, with the over-under around 51.5. If you break those odds down, that equals a 30-21 win for Alabama. And I think that's actually a little surprising considering where Alabama came from, considering where Florida State came from coming into this year. You do get them at home, which is typically around a 3-point bump for the home team here. So, I mean, they're telling you that right now they're expecting Alabama to only be about a 5.5-point better team than Florida State, playing inside Doak Campbell. So I think that's really interesting. Hopefully Florida State can pull the upset here. But that's closer than I thought. And honestly, I think if you did lose that game, again, we don't have moral victories here in Tallahassee. We want to win every single game that we line up again. But I think if you come out of that game 30-21, that's not terrible, really, when you think about it, considering where we came from last year. But again, we're trying to pretend like last year never happened. We're trying to carry over from 2023 and what we saw this program do the 2 seasons, before that in 2022 and 2023. Another interesting line here: Notre Dame is a 2.5-point favorite against Miami. That's going to be a big opening season, a game opener to watch as well there, because you're going to want to see what Miami does. You got them coming to town on October 4th, and they're losing a lot of pieces too. They brought in some transfers. They've signed some talented recruits. Notre Dame has lost some pieces, but they're a team that played in the national championship last year, so that's going to be one to watch. Then Clemson versus LSU in Death Valley. That's Clemson's Death Valley, not LSU's Death Valley. I don't know about you guys. I consider LSU the real Death Valley, but I digress. Clemson is a 2.5-point favorite over LSU. And I think really at home, and Clemson being kind of a better program right now, even though they haven't had the success that we've seen them have in the past, maybe I thought that one would be a little bit bigger, maybe 5 points or something like that, 6-point favorite there. So that's going to be an interesting one as well. So again, like we said, we talked about before in the CFP talk, you have 3 really interesting games here coming up in week 1 of 2025 with Bama at Florida State, Notre Dame playing Miami, and Clemson versus LSU. This could be a big statement for the ACC to come out if they were to win all 3 of these games. Now, we're not cheerleading for the ACC. We don't do that. But I think when you are fighting for conference supremacy, you kind of need them to look good, because you need your schedule to look good throughout the course of the season. But it's going to give us a good measuring stick of where all these programs sit. Now, looking at the conference winners overall, the odds-on favorite is, as we mentioned, Clemson in the ACC. You have tied odds there in the Big 12 with Kansas State and Arizona State. So Kenny Dillingham got that program going there. I think they were picked to finish last year and ended up winning the Big 12. So shout out to Kenny for what he's been able to do there with the Sun Devils. Ohio State picked to win the Big 10 this year. Now, of course, they didn't win the Big 10 last year, but they won the national title. And Texas is the favorite to win the SEC. So kind of interesting to see how these games are going to play out. Just again, these are way too early odds. When you look at your national champion odds as well, Ohio State is number 1, Texas is number 2 currently, with Oregon at 3, Georgia at 4, Penn State at 5, and Notre Dame at 6. So a lot of familiar names from last year's playoffs looking to make it back for another run in 2025. So we'll see who's going to be that surprise team, who's going to be that Arizona State, who's going to be that SMU, who's going to be that surprise team. Maybe it'll even be Florida State. Who knows? We'll know a lot when we see this team take on Bama there on August 30th inside Doak. So that's some of the ones that I thought you guys would be interested in here, just looking at the way too early odds. Again, these odds makers can be wrong. And now they don't get it wrong a lot, but they do get it wrong. And so we'll see how things shake out as we get closer to the season. We will revisit these and see if they've updated them at all once news starts to come out from the spring. Now, speaking of spring practice, obviously Florida State, we're trendsetters and we didn't even know it. We canceled the spring game because of stadium renovations. Nebraska canceled their spring game soon after because they thought people were, hiding in the bushes trying to hunt down their recruits. I don't know, or their players. I don't know that that's the case, but, maybe, okay, it makes sense. And then I just saw where I believe it's Texas and USC both canceled their spring games too for kind of the same reasons So it looks like this will be probably the end of the spring game era in college football in the next few years. I believe programs are going to start phasing them out. But as we get closer to spring, we will be bringing you guys spring content, looking at key position battles and just updates in the news. The team, they're going through the tour of duty right now. They're getting ready to start spring practice soon, and so we'll have a lot of updates going into that from what we can get our ear to the ground to hear. Unfortunately, because there is no spring game, we won't get to see them in person this year. But one bit of news that has broke prior to spring is Florida State running back Mekhi Danzy moving to wide receiver. Now, this was a big move for him because of the speed that he has. I think this is going to be a great position change for him. And frankly, Florida State had a loaded backfield. When you look at the guys that they brought back, I don't know how many touches he was going to get. So I think this is a good opportunity for him to get touches on the field. Now, we saw that dangerous speed last year against Duke when he ran a kickoff back for a touchdown. This is a guy who is really tearing up track and field for Florida State right now. So this is someone that you want to find ways to get him the ball to utilize that speed. Now, there are some decent wide receivers in this group now too. You got Squirrel White. Keep in mind, obviously you got Deuce Robinson coming in here. Jalen Lucas is going to be coming back from injury. But again, I think Mekhi Danzy, we saw him, catch a wheel route out of the backfield last year and break a big one. I think that was against Charleston Southern. So, this is just, again, it's a weapon that has speed that can hurt you in space that you want to find ways to get the ball. So Mekhi Danzy moving over to wide receiver. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, well, one quick thing, I do got to give credit to the men's basketball team. We just talked about the women's basketball team beating Miami. Well, the men's basketball team also beat Miami here this week as well, notching one last win for Leonard Hamilton before he goes out at the end of the season against his former program, Miami. They got the win there. And, it was just, I think that's 14 of 15 now that they've won against Miami. So just absolutely dominating the U on the hardwood. So good to see that win there. For the basketball team. They got a few more games left. Hopefully, again, they continue to go out on a high note. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we get out of here is baseball. They are returning to Hauser this weekend for another series. And this time it'll be against Penn. Now, Penn is coming into this one and has not played yet. So they do not have much film to go off of. We don't know a whole lot about them yet, but I think that's an advantage for FSU. You've had a chance to work out some things. You already know what your starting pitching rotation is. You don't have to mess around with that. You've had a chance to work out some kinks in your first four games. Florida State is, of course, 4-0, coming off that 6-2 win over South Florida in Tampa on Tuesday. So looking at this Penn team, they are not a bad squad. They've done pretty good in the Ivy League. They have made a regional for the past 2 years. They won the Ivy League tournament, I think the last 2 years as well, or at least in 2023 they did. And when you look at 2024, not a great record, 24-25, but made the regional, and they went 0-2 in that regional. But in 2023, had a great season, 34-16, 2-2 in the regional. They beat the number 1 seed Auburn. They beat the number 3 seed Samford, and then got eliminated by the number 2 seed Southern Miss. So again, this is not a terrible program. They return a lot from last year, although they did lose a couple of crucial pieces. Now, we already know it's going to be Jamie Arnold on the mound on Friday. You got Joey Vellini on Saturday and Wes Mendez finishing out the weekend on Sunday. We've already seen what Florida State's starting pitching rotation can do, and these guys are impressive. So you're going to want to continue to work those guys, work that pitch count up. See if you can get them the 5-6 innings. You're going to want to continue to feel out your bullpen rotation and the guys that you trust to bring in the weekend. And then you're just working on the batting. You're really trying to get the depth of the lineup to be producing. You've had some guys that have racked up some strikeouts. You've had some guys that have rebounded. Max Williams was a guy that didn't start off too great other than the home run in that opening series win over James Madison, but had a good game against South Florida. So that's kind of what you want to see. That's what these early season games are for, just kind of getting in rhythm, getting in sync before you get to the tougher part of your schedule. And really Florida State, they have a pretty good schedule. They ramp up with a couple of easy series. They got Florida in a midweek there before they really get to tough teams where you have to go down to Miami. They don't even have to leave the state of Florida until they travel to Notre Dame on March 28th. So that's why you want to use these to get that momentum in the early season. Now for Penn, you may be watching this by the time they've already started. First pitch is at 5 o'clock today, then 1 o'clock on Saturday and noon on Sunday. For the Quakers, it'll be for the Oatmeal Boys, I guess, as you want to call them. For the Quakers here, it'll be sophomore right-handed pitcher Josh Katz on Friday, had a 7.41 ERA last year. On Saturday, you're looking at sophomore left-handed pitcher Marty Cohn, a 7.71 ERA last season. And on Sunday, you'll be facing senior left-handed pitcher Will Tobin, who gets to start with a 4.81 ERA last year. Most of these guys worked out of the closer roles, out of the bullpen last year, now transitioning into that starter role. Their offense wasn't great last year, but it wasn't that bad either. Wasn't anything special, just kind of average run-of-the-mill college baseball offense here. So this is a series that I feel like Florida State should come in and not only get the series win, but also get the sweep. So hopefully that's something they are able to do, and hopefully we just continue to see them get better. That's what you want. Also this weekend, the Joanne Graff Classic is happening. Florida State softball started that with a run rule win over FAMU. I believe it was 11-0. Now this weekend they do have a top 10 doubleheader against Texas A&M. They're in Tallahassee, so make sure you guys show up if you're in the area to support them, because that's going to be a big matchup. You know, they've run ruled the last two ranked teams that they played in top 5 Oklahoma State and number 16, I believe it was, Missouri. So this is a big one for Florida State softball. They are on fire right now, so hopefully they can carry that momentum. So that's going to do it today, guys. We had a little bit of everything to cover, so we appreciate you guys tuning in. Make sure you drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. We are still pushing to hit that 2,000 subscriber mark on YouTube. We always appreciate a rate and review on the podcast as well. Helps us reach other Noel fans as, you know, we continue to cover Florida State in a positive manner. We appreciate you guys supporting us. Also check out Alumni Hall, especially if you're going to be in Tallahassee this weekend, and make sure you use code SPEAR to save 10%. Hopefully we have Michael back next week as well. I know you guys are probably missing him. He's still recovering from being ill, so we're hopefully going to have him back. But, we'll be bringing you updates throughout the week as well. We're going to try and start putting out more episodes, even if it's some kind of shorter takes to be on top of the news. But with that being said, guys, I appreciate you watching. We will catch you on the next one. And as always, go Noles.